Oh, hello, and welcome to Dark Passages. Dark Passages is a weekly podcast presented by me, Chris Stone, reading stories I've written over the past 15 years or so. Today we will continue Route 66 with Episode 3. There are some things that you'll never know about yourself unless you ask. Most people are afraid of direct criticism, and Rain was no different. If anything, he was perhaps more sensitive to it than most. But sometimes there are things that you just have to know. Whether that knowledge will help you or not is indeterminate, but your belly itches where you can't scratch it and your mind aches while you ponder the possible responses to these questions that you don't want to ask, but know you have to. Rain was tense today. His stomach was knotted. His breakfast was doing backflips in his belly. Today would be the day that he'd ask his mother about the birds. Her condition was declining, and he knew he was running out of time. She'd been bedridden with an IV bobbing in her arm for 2 weeks. An EKG machine on wheels droned on as it built electric green mountains beside her bed. If he was ever going to ask her about the birds, today had to be the day. Dr. Albright had told him that she was dying, that there was little left that he could do. He'd told Rain to prepare himself to say goodbye, and so Rain had. And now he was at peace with the idea that his mother was dying. But there were certain things that he still had to know, secrets that had to be revealed before she was 6 feet underground. And so he drug his feet into her room, stood alongside her bed, and looked at her idiot, crossed eyes. She should have died on that roadside, but doctors got to do their doctor things, patient be damned. It would have been more merciful. Her 2 years of extended life in that facility were pointless. She'd never regained movement in her legs. Her neck was fused straight, and her memories were jumbled and disjointed. She stared at the ceiling with those crossed eyes, an idiot bubble of drool clinging to her lower lip. Albright had introduced a little morphine into her intravenous diet a few weeks ago, and her speech had slurred, but she'd complain less about the pain. The halo, long gone, had left red, puckered sores on her temples, sores that would never heal. She smiled at him from her bedside.
Herman, it's good to see you again. To what do I owe this honor?
It never stopped hurting that she didn't recognize him, but he was there for more important matters. The birds. Rain choked, his voice trembling. I've come to discuss the birds. Her mouth lolled open, her eyes wide and unfocused.
I, I can't.
Rain bent over the bed and took his mother's hands in his. Her skin felt like paper. She watched him with reproachful eyes. Sylvia, it's been far too long. I think it's time we discuss the birds. She snatched her hand away from his, a scornful look in her eye.
Now you want to discuss the birds? Now? What was it, like 30 goddamn years ago?
Rain retreated a tentative step. Look, I'm sorry I wasn't there for you back then. I should have been, but I'm here now. I'm here now for you.
You're goddamn right. You should have been here back then. I mean, how could you? How could you?
His mother was crying, tears leaking down her face. Her hands clutched her nightgown, bunching the fabric around her neck. Is it too late to ask for forgiveness? Rain asked.
Too late? I can never forgive you for what you did to me in the park all those years ago. Never. The birds know. They saw it all. And if they could talk, you'd be in jail. If my goddamn father would have listened to me, if he had believed me, you'd be dead by now. For what you did and for what you let them do to me.
Suddenly, Rain didn't want to hear any more. Suddenly, he was ashamed for even having asked in the first place. She had been raped by Herman. It was obvious. This dark family secret that she kept buried for years was now being screamed on her hospital deathbed. He just stood there, her face twisted in rage, her nightgown bunched in her fist, covering any observable skin. He stood there, an avatar of his mother's rapist. Just how many of Herman's little friends had violated her? His stomach gurgled, putrid acid rising in his throat, and he knew he just couldn't hold it back any longer. He raced out of her room into the hallway bathroom, his hand covering his mouth, keeping the vomit momentarily at bay. It seemed he was wrong. Some questions don't ever need to be answered, even if you ask.
So, what about you, big guy? Are there any questions that I can't ask you? Are some topics verboten.
Moon sucked the last of her Slurpee up through the loop-de-loop straw and returned the empty cup to the dashboard cup holder one last time. Rain considered her question for a moment. Sure, there were a fuck ton of things that she could ask that he wouldn't be comfortable in sharing. But he'd unknowingly made her relive her stabbing attack drama, so he figured he'd give her a chance at an equally scar-inducing memory. Well, I'm sure there's something I won't answer, but feel free to give it a shot. Let's see.
So, some secrets are better left buried, huh?
Rain drove on into the black, the Plymouth's twin beams carving stripes on the dark highway. Leaning back with her feet crossed on the dash as she did, she looked over her shoulder, out the window, into the starry night. Wasn't as bright as it should be. Sure, the starlight shimmered like diamonds thrown on a jeweler's black felt, but the moon was absent. She couldn't find her namesake anywhere.
Oh, god damn it. I hate moonless nights. Makes for shitty conversations.
Squinting into the distance as far as the darkness would allow him, Rain said, I'll tell you one thing, it sure as fuck doesn't help with the driving.
Okay, Rain. Well, I'm going to ask you a question. Let's just see if you dodge it or not. You see, I judge myself a pretty good people watcher, an amateur psychiatrist, if you will. And from our few hours together, I think maybe I've already built a pretty accurate psychological profile of you. Would you like me to run it by you and see what sticks close to home?
Rain smirked. All right, go ahead, let's see what you think of me.
Well, first, I would guess that you're a bit of a loner. I base this solely on the fact that you are driving through the New Mexican desert alone. A drive so full of monotony that a normal person would beg for a passenger and or a bottle of Xanax to just end it all. But you set out alone. So, that leads me to think that you don't have a person to ask.
He touched the tip of his nose to indicate that she was on the right track. She bolted up straight in her seat, her feet clapping the floorboards.
I knew it. A girl knows these things.
She winked and again began chewing on her empty plastic straw. She spoke through clenched teeth, grinding away at the plastic.
So, let's see. I think you, deep down, crave attention. Although you'd never admit it. You wear the look of a man who's grew up without a father, and your eyes seem to mask some kind of tragedy. Am I close?
Rain waved his hand back and forth in that close but no cigar fashion. Hit and miss. I did have a father. He was a piece of shit. But I did have one once. As far as family tragedy goes, he sighed almost imperceptibly. I'm not sure I've gone through anything worse than anyone else. He was lying and she knew it, and worse, he knew she knew. They were cheek to cheek dancing, locked in a mutually inclusive lie. She chomped on the straw, leaned back, and returned her feet to the dashboard.
Very well, Rain. You will forever be a mystery then. Or at least until we get to Albuquerque.
After a few more miles, she began.
And now comes the uncomfortable part.
What's that?
You have serious luggage under your eyes, and I know I could use a nap. So, I'm thinking we should stop for the night. Albuquerque will still be there tomorrow waiting for us.
Nonsense. He swigged another mouthful of Monster Energy and jangled the can for her to see.
Oh, please. That's not going to do fuck all when your brain decides enough is enough and shuts everything down at 65 miles per hour. And I, for one, don't want to wind up smeared alongside the highway, my juicy remains being fought over by coyotes and cougars. So I say we stop for the night.
She tapped the windshield with her big toe.
And now, the truly uncomfortable, weird part. I think we should stop at a hotel, and I think we should share a room because my guitar case isn't as full of singles as it used to be.
I thought you said there was nothing in that guitar case but bras and dildos. Moon laughed.
Oh, it is. Believe you that. But it's also where a girl wearing a dress without pockets can stash some cash. So don't worry about that. But anyways, like I was saying, the old guitar case isn't as heavy as it used to be, so I would appreciate sharing the cost with you. Oh, and I know. Whoa, some sexy stripper asking me to stop and share a room for the night. Now don't go getting your hopes up, mister. I know how you guys can be. I've got scars to prove it. There'll be no hanky panky. I'll sleep on the couch, floor, or the fucking bathtub if I need to.
She howled laughter at that thought. He wasn't ready to stop. Hell, Monster's patented mix of tellurine and caffeine were just starting to dance around in his head. But he did have to admit that it was next to impossible to see the highway lines in the absolute desert darkness.
There.
She boarded, pointing to a billboard growing underneath the Plymouth's old headlights that read, Blue Oasis Inn, 10 miles.
Oh, it sounds so mysterious. Maybe there's some axe wielding power tool obsessed maniac with mother issues running the place.
She giggled coyly. You watch too much TV. After a few more silent miles, she continued.
So you had a tumultuous childhood, eh?
She paused and let it sink in for a minute. What? Was all he could muster.
I'm sorry, you just look the part is all. If you'll excuse me for saying so, but you really do look like you've been through one fuck of a ringer at some point in your life.
Rain checked her from the corner of his eyes and returned his attention to the road. Is it that obvious? Is my perceived tragedy that apparent?
I told you, Rain, I read people. That's my gift. My mama used to tell me that God gives everyone one single gift, and that you are born with some trait and or skill that you and you alone have. The trick, Mama used to say, was finding that skill and exploiting it. Well, those weren't her words per exactly, but I think we both know where she was headed with that line of logic.
Moon shifted the position of her crossed feet in the dashboard's narrow glass cubbyhole.
I think she was trying to tell me to make money with my skill. Unfortunately for me, the only skills I have ever found were being able to read people and peeling my clothes off. I think we both know which one pays better.
She smiled.
But anyways, I'm dancing around the point here. Oh my God. Pun totally not intended, but I guess when you got it, it's hard to turn it off. Anyway, I'm losing my point here. My point here is that in your eyes, I read tragedy. You asked if it was that apparent. Well, to me, it is. To others, I'm not so sure. Probably not. Most people don't study others like I do. Most people don't care enough to.
The steering wheel thundered under his hands, the Plymouth's tire thumping from needing a balancing. Or maybe it was just how those old buckets of bolts worked. Everything jostling and jimmying until the whole thing finally just shook itself apart. Well, you're the first one to ever ask. Most people don't ask personal questions like you do. Most people ask about the weather. Small talk. Inconsequential things to pass the time.
Those things are as boring as a mashed potato sandwich, and you know it. I don't need a god darn weather report from people. I can walk outside for that. Besides, here in the desert, the weather doesn't change. I want to learn from people's experiences rather than just sit there in an idiotic silence pretending they never existed.
Blue Oasis Inn, 2 miles, a highway sign blared. Okay, fine. I'll tell you. She clapped her hands together excitedly and interlaced her fingers like she was praying, or at least about to show him all of the little people inside of her steeple. Her smirk of satisfaction was impossible to conceal. You want to know my secret? Okay, fine, I'll tell you. He swallowed hard, his throat aching. My father, you see, he was, well, and probably still is, just a total piece of shit. I mean, he's long gone from my life. Could be dead for all the fuck I care. You see, my mom was in a car wreck. She broke her neck, something they called an internal decapitation.
Oh, God.
Moon freed all of the congregation from the church and instead covered her gasped mouth. You see, it's this weird thing where the neck breaks clean in two, but the skin stays attached. They found her, and her head was just dangling. A short medevac chopper ride later, and they were screwing a metal halo thing into her skull just to hold everything back together. So, anyway, They saved her. I guess it was a goddamn medical miracle. But, and it's a key fucking but, she was never the same, you know? I think the problem was the lack of oxygen to her brain during the internal decapitation. She'd forgotten things like people, for instance, me entirely. But while that accident had erased some things, it had unearthed others, memories that her brain had long ago buried, things that she'd never wanted to remember. Like long hidden childhood traumas. A tentative tear trickled down his cheek and he thumbed it away without looking.
Oh my God. Well, you don't have to go on if you don't want to, Rain.
He swallowed hard. This would be the hardest part. But then again, honestly, it had fuck all to do with him, so he told it. So she was raped when she was a kid. She told me all about it, thinking that I was her cousin, that he was somehow involved. She blamed him. She said he just sat there and let it happen, that he could have stopped it but didn't. She accused him of just standing there and watching while his friends had their way with her in the park. How's that for fucking family tragedy? Moon was crying, thick runnels of mascara racing down her cheeks. She stuttered.
I
Rain's lone tear was all that he had allowed to escape his eye. He reminded himself that he had no emotions, that he had drowned them in a lake a long time ago. Of course, that was just something that he told himself to calm himself down. Only a psychopath didn't have emotions. He just didn't want to show his.
I think you're gonna miss the exit.
She pointed to the sign that boasted, "Turn now for the Blue Oasis Inn, your oasis in the desert." The Plymouth hopped the highway curve, sending tiny dust devils scrambling in its wake, and Rain angled it onto the exit ramp.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Dark Passages. Please join us next week as the story continues. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, share, and rate and review us on iTunes or wherever else you get your podcasts. Please follow us on dark.passages.podcast on Instagram for additional information and episode release schedules. Original music by Iriamu. You can find more of his music through his Instagram page at iriamu.music or on Bandcamp at iriamu1@bandcamp.com. Original stories are all written by Chris Stone and are available on Amazon as ebooks. I'm Savannah, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.